Hello everyone. I have been keeping a nature journal for 2022 and we're now at the halfway point, so this is 6 months in my nature journal. In this video I'm just going to take you through what I've done in this first half of the year and a few things that I've learned along the way. This is my journal and it's a book by Lotus Blue Book Art. It has these wonderful deckled edges and they've been covered in some gold leaf. Before starting the book, I went through and I stained all of the pages different colours. And I did that using botanical inks created by Bohemian Raspberry Art. Now both of these are linked in the description below. These stained pages have been really interesting. It's the first time I've worked like this. Every single time you turn the page you have a different colour or texture. And it's been really interesting to be working with that as I go through. It adds an unplanned element into your journal. I particularly look forward to this one. Let's start from the beginning then. And this is the title page. I started right back in December 2021. These are the weather symbols that I use. In every month I have a title page. And I wanted to keep a record of the weather, the wind conditions and any other interesting notes. I also have these blocks. And they are the mood blocks, so they're my mood and energy levels, and I need to keep track of this. So I use like a battery charger like you'd have for your phone, with 1 block meaning very low mood or energy, and 5 blocks meaning the complete opposite. All of these were sketched from life, from autumn leaves and some cones and rose hips that I found in December, and they were sketched in fine liner and painted with botanical ink. Moving on into January, as I mentioned before, I've got this title page here and I've also got the moon phases. These little sketches of the birds, I do a lot of work outside, which you'll see if you look further back into my older videos. And I take some of those sketches and then recreate them into the journal in kind of still keeping the sketchy kind of look, but with a little bit more attention to placement than I would do in my outdoor journal. Also, a first for me this year, I started using pressed flowers and leaves in my journal. So here I deliberately painted the leaves first, and then got them into the press and put them in a few weeks later after they were ready. To begin with, in January, I was really doing lots of small pictures. I was trying at the very start to do something every day, and that quickly became just too much to manage, certainly in terms of posting a video every day. I always do try to do some sort of nature journaling every day, but sometimes it's just a mess and it wasn't really going to be able to go into here. So I was interested in the first leaves, so the first honeysuckle leaves, and the ivy berries, catkins. And here was the first time I made my own ink. This ink was made from willow. So I decided to actually paint a willow tree into the journal and to start practicing using pressed flowers in different ways. So these leaves were the first leaves to come up in the garden of the goosegrass. So I wanted to recreate that in here. So I should point out that especially in this first month, I don't do things in here in the chronological order, as in I don't start on one side and then go right through until I get to the next month. I set aside a certain number of pages for each month at the beginning, and then depending on the subject, I pick the interesting colour background that I want, and just gradually built a page up. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4 different pictures all on the same page. Just kind of, I think this one came first, and then the fossil down here, then the sunfire here, and then this scene to fill it out. So it's kind of growing the composition as you go along. Moving on into February, I decided I wanted to try a little bit of collage to put some white back in for these new emerging snowdrops and primroses. And then created my title page for February with all of the weather observations, and I did that with adding some antique pressed flowers. These flowers came in a flower press that when I bought it from an antique shop, it already had these violets pressed inside. So I added these here, and also added a bit of extra ink to embellish around them. Now this was an interesting day. So gathering the coltsfoot at the beach, sort of after the storms had come, so the beach is looking, in a quite stormy state with all of these bits washed out by the tide. I gathered some rock from the cliffs and drew on the page with that to create this little background. This is the red rock that all of these coltsfoot here grow out of. So then I gathered the coltsfoot, I made some ink from it, and I pressed some as well. And altogether that it brings so many memories of that particular time. Now looking at the start of some of those bright yellows that come in early spring. So the first daffodils, the first celandine. And it's interesting to see here that the celandine leaves have gone to a little bit more towards the brown, but they've kept their shape, and they're still looking very good after 4 or 5 months in here. But the flower has done really well, and it's still looking really bright and vibrant. This is some gorse, and I collected gorse flowers and made a ink out of those, and that's the colour that you're seeing here. I went to Goat Island, that was a nice day. All of these, I should say, if you're interested in any of these, they're all back in my videos. You can find the outdoor ones in the outdoor playlist, and the studio ones if you want to see the creation of all of this. It's all available here on the YouTube. This was nice. There was a lovely young blackbird that was hanging around, and I saw him every day. I decided to do some sketches of him and then transfer those sketches across into here. Now into March, and March was an interesting month. I decided to mix up what the title page looks like for a bit of interest. I wanted on this side to show the greenery in the garden, because that was just really starting to look... I really love my garden in the early spring, and seeing all of this starting to come up from the bare soil, I needed to celebrate that in here. This is exploring a disused flour mill down by the River Parrett in Somerset. And with this one I decided to add some maps in. So I've got what the mill looked like in 1840 on the map, in 1888, and then when it had been marked as disused in the 1921 to 1943 map, and there's barely anything mapped for it now, just disused mill. It was surrounded by snowdrops. It was a really beautiful one, and that again, you can find that on my outdoor playlist. This is a nice page. It's using this lovely green background that I had and using it to its best advantage by showing it off against some blues and yellows. Blues and yellows can look great against green because they're the two constituent colours. So it kind of creates a quite complementary, pretty effect. Making the most of these wonderful celandine flowers that are still looking good after all of these months. Here I'm using a lot of botanical ink, so all of this is Bohemian Raspberries botanical inks. On this page I've also used some Derwent ink tints. So throughout here I'm mainly using inks and a little bit of watercolour on occasion. There's certain flowers that I want to kind of always celebrate that when they first arrive. So I've put in some stitchwort here and primroses. And I spent a lot of the early spring feeding the birds. Near us we have a reserve where the birds will feed from your hand. And this particular robin is very well known to us here. And I wanted to sort of make sure that he made an appearance in this journal. Now in April, and April is all about bluebells. I really like how the bluebells look against this background. The purple really pops out and really stands out here. Sometimes I don't want to put too much on the page. This is very pretty and I wouldn't want to add more to it. This is again some antique flower pressings, and this is some campion. Also in April I went to Skomer Island to see the puffins, and I recreated a scene here on this page with some pressed sea campion here, as these birds were among the sea campion, so this is quite a strong memory. And again, walking the Pembrokeshire coast path, seeing the new thrift and using a little bit of collage to really try and make that bright pink show up. Also, I made my first batch of nettle ink and tried a little bit of printing here with cow parsley leaves. And doing a little bit more celebration of what those wonderful bluebells looked like in the woods. Also, April was the first time I took my GoPro into the water, and I put it in some rock pools to film the life in the rock pool. There are hermit crabs and shrimps and various whelks and snails, anemones and seaweeds. So I wanted to recreate that across this entire page. And now we're into May, and in this one I just wanted to take a few little flowers that were starting to come up and were the most prominent flowers of the time. So we've got some May daisies or oxeye daisies, some dandelion and forget-me-nots, and then I painted some of the flowers as well. There's some speedwells here that are pressed. This one, actually, the weather observations go over the page. I don't remember whether that was intentional or whether I just kind of ran out of space here, but that's okay. And using the pressed flowers again, we've got some campion, some archangel, speedwell, forget-me-not, and clover here, and painting the first butterflies that I saw in that month. Again, making more of the pressed flowers. I think in May I was very taken with the new growth when the cow parsley first came out, when I saw first fetches. And I was writing that a lot in my outdoor nature journal. So when I gathered them, I put them into the press and made this page to display them. And the whole time, of course, going and feeding the birds. And by this point, we've got young robins. And I was feeding young robins from the hand, sometimes in pairs or threes. And the beautiful bluebells that were still going strong in the woods. All of this is back in the archives here on YouTube, so you can go through if you want to see any of these pages being made. You can find all of that on my channel, and while you're there, make sure you subscribe too. Now we're into June, and it was all about the beach in June, so I made my title page to celebrate the blues of the sea and the sky. Also, I went on holiday and walked some of the southwest coast path further round. That's down in Cornwall. So I actually live along the southwest coast path here in East Devon, but we go and walk other sections of it from time to time. And I was interested in the dragonflies and the insect life that we saw along the way. So bees, caterpillars, dragonflies, damselflies on this page. And you can see really how the staining makes this picture, because these would just be a little bit isolated and perhaps a little bit flat and uninteresting if they were just positioned on a white page. But by having the staining behind it, it really elevates it, and it means you don't have to put quite as much work into these. It's going to look really beautiful anyway. We've got various orchids and irises that I've seen this month. The bee orchids grow near the harbour where I live, and these common spotted orchids I saw along the coast path. Also irises coming up everywhere, and bird's foot trefoil, which is this one, this fetch here, is very, very common in June. There's the mining buildings near Portreath in Cornwall. Sometimes I like to just put a landscape across a couple of pages. It's not, nature journaling doesn't have to always be details about species. I see nature journaling as the entire experience of landscape and the flora and fauna that inhabit it. And also kind of how I fit into that landscape and how humans fit into it. But without such a focus on human life, I'm particularly interested, as you've seen before, in ruined buildings and how nature reclaims them. So I was struck by the shape of this against the headland. Sketching the house martins that are flying over the river near our studio in Collerton. And then finally the rugosa roses down at the harbour. And I lost my nan in June as well, so I put her name in the centre of the page here. And that's it, and then we're on to July. So I've got, I think it was four or so pages to fill up this month. Yep, and then on to August. So I hope that was interesting for you. That's the first 6 months in my nature journal. If you are interested in seeing any more details, you can find me on Patreon. You can find my Instagram in the description below. And there's the whole library of my videos for this year. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.